Hello guys, it's Kasim. Welcome back again. I hope you're doing all right. So I saw this article, these two articles actually by Pope Francis, where he was talking about the fact that anyone who has sex outside of marriage, that sex actually is not the most serious sin. And he also was talking about the fact that owning cats and dogs instead of having children is a very selfish thing to do. So I wanted to just give my opinion on it. I don't know if you're going to find it useful. Maybe it might give you some thought, some room for thought to think about for yourself, examine, self-reflect, see what you think about yourself, about how you stand on this. But we can have a bit of a dialogue. So whatever you think, comment below. But also, before I get into what I think, if you want to help me get to 1,000 subscribers by June, and you like the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. Okay, cool. So what do I think about this whole thing? So I made some notes on this and I wrote down some things. One of the first things that I wrote down is, look, instead of looking to your parents, instead of looking to the Pope, instead of looking to religion, instead of looking to society, why don't we start looking to each other to have conversations about what we believe and what we stand for? I think we're living in this world today where nobody wants to have a conversation because everybody is so sensitive and everybody is so easily offended. And therefore, we don't leave any room to ever have discussions. I was actually talking to my friend and I was having this conversation that I'm so lucky that I grew up in a household where we had conversations about really difficult topics. We had conversations about really difficult subjects, controversial subjects, because what it did is that it left loads of room in my family and in myself to be able to speak to people who oppose me directly and be okay with those people. And I think in marriages and in relationships, and I think just generally today in society, so many of us are so scared to offend people, and we're so scared to be offended, we take it personal anytime anyone opposes our belief, that we can't even ever really talk about anything which is really important. We can't really talk about anything which is controversial, anything which is meaningful. And ultimately, I think what brings people together is the opposing of ideologies, the opposing of beliefs, and all of a sudden, and then looking at what the themes are, and looking at what binds these two such opposing beliefs, right? You may be a Christian, I may be a Muslim, but actually what binds us both is that we both believe that there is something which is greater than us, right? We both believe that in compassion, in looking after people, right? And I think many of us aren't coming from that place because we're so focused on what other people are telling us, or what other people expect us to behave like, on what other entities, whether that be religion, whether that be society, whether that be legislation. But I actually think, personally, as Kasim, that it is far much more important for us to have a conversation with each other about what is important. So, for example, in this whole thing about people who are having sex outside of marriage not seeming to be a bad sin. It doesn't matter whether it's a bad sin or not. What is important is, what do we as a couple, what do we in our relationship, are we okay for us to have that kind of relationship? Are we okay for us to go and look, when I talk about people going outside of their relationship, you have to be open to the fact that there are some people who engage in polyamorous relationships. There are some people who engage in swinging, right? So actually going outside of a marriage isn't necessarily such a bad thing, as depending on whether or not you've had that conversation with people. And I think we're living in this world where a lot of us just don't even want to consider that it is that some people are going to go outside of their relationship to seek some of this. It's interesting because I've spent a lot of time studying people who are right at the top of society. And it's funny because when you start going up higher in terms of social status, marriage in itself is not about love. It is actually more of a business transaction. It is more about bringing two different people. You're successful, you're well off, you're socially well connected, I'm socially well connected, I'm well off, I have influence. Let's bridge together and make something even greater. And actually, when you are operating at the higher ends of the social spectrum, it's funny because the man will usually have a side woman, a sugar baby, in which they just simply have sexual relations with, and then the man will also, the woman will also have whatever a partner who they meet and they just simply have sexual relations with. But you have to understand that the lower down you come in social economic status, the more a marriage is actually about love. And I found that really fascinating as I was studying these different areas of life. And my point to you is that instead of looking towards what other people think you should be doing, about what marriage should be like, what about you look to yourselves and actually determine for yourselves what you think a marriage is supposed to be like? Now, on the subject of, people deciding to have cats, deciding to have dogs over having children, I have some very strong beliefs about this. But before I give you my beliefs, one of the things that's really important, I think, for us to always think about is it is okay for both you and I to have both opposing beliefs and to still be friends and to still be amicable with each other. That just because I hold the views that I hold, it doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. And just because you hold the beliefs that you hold, it doesn't mean that you are in somewhat superior to me. My belief about people who decide to have, obviously, animals over children, which it is becoming more and more and more common. Literally this morning when I was in co-op, I was speaking to a woman and she was saying to me that her daughter has just had her her first child, and what would be this lady's first grandchild. And she said, my daughter doesn't want any more children. And she said that her husband had to struggle to actually get her to even have one child. And so I personally believe that, look, the reality of what I believe is that we should be having children, right? Biologically, on a biological level, we're made to have children. And I do think it is very, very selfish if you do decide to have dogs and cats, because what essentially you're trying to do is that you're trying to evade responsibility, right? I think at the source of it, a lot of people today don't want to take responsibility. And the ultimate way to have responsibility is, and to be tied down by moral obligation, is to have a child. Now, of course, you could say, well, Kasim, that's selfish because it's all about me and the child doesn't have their free choice to be born or not. Of course, we could say that. But ultimately, as part of society, I think it is, and just ourselves, part of having a children is in part to also set limitations about what is okay and what isn't okay, right? Because, for example, let's just look at an example of people who don't have children. You're going to be a lot more promiscuous if you don't have children, because you have nobody that you have to rely on. Or how do I put this? If you don't have children, you don't have to. You can be as promiscuous as what you want, because you don't have to worry about your reputation. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that you are going to be promiscuous more. But I'm just saying, to use that as an example, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? And so, having children is a lot more. You learn when you have a child. You learn a lot about yourself. It's funny because I'm writing this book about the role of a parent, and one of the things that I write in that book is that having children is less actually about the child and much more about you, because you learn so much about yourself when you have a child. You think you're a patient person? Wonderful. Like yesterday I was writing an article and I was saying, if you think you're a patient person, take your child shopping at 12 o'clock in Tesco's or Co-op and watch what happens. Because the child is going to throw tantrums, they're going to try to grab things, they're going to need feeding, they're not going to want to wear the jacket, they're going to want to push the trolley. All of this stuff, you try it, and all of a sudden your patience are going to be so tested. And the thing that I think is really important about that is, if you don't have kids, you lack the ability to be able to understand some of these problems. And the thing is, we're living in a world where if you are not involved in society, then you allow things to happen that shouldn't happen. If you don't understand how vulnerable children are because you've held your own child in your hand, you wouldn't understand the need to have men locked away. You wouldn't understand the need to have pedophiles kept a certain distance. Now, that doesn't mean you're not intellectual. That doesn't mean you can't intellectualize it. But it is a very different. It's like people who say, well, if I had a child, my child would never behave like that. It is so easy for you to say that until you actually have your own child, and you realize how difficult it is to discipline a child without you getting the child scared, without you imposing your beliefs, without forcing the child to do something. And so when you actually have a child there, you learn so much about yourself. It is unreal. So for me, I do believe the same as Pope Francis in terms of that having children is selfish, because I do think it's selfish, right? Now, obviously, in saying that, if you have a medical issue, if you can't have children, of course, I get that. But if you have the ability to have children and you do find somebody and your partner does want children as well, then I think you should, right? But obviously, as I say, that's my belief. That doesn't mean that I'm a bad person and you're a good person, or that you're a good person and that I'm a bad person. That's just what I believe. That's where I stand. That's what I think. But what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree with me? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. So comment below. Let's sort of have a dialogue. Let's create this environment where we can actually have a conversation without me thinking you're my enemy and you thinking that I'm some evil, domesticated, and empathetic kind of person. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So comment below. Also, please, if you want to help me get to 1,000 subscribers by June, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a good rest of the week. See you later. Bye.